Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about how to figure out which group design code sheet you want to use depending on the structure of your article that you're looking at. So right now, I'm in the Mega Meta Coding folder, and where I want to go is right here to the group design effect sizes. And what you're going to see is there are 5 different code sheets depending on the design of your study. And this is what we thought might just be the easiest, most straightforward way to code these studies, because depending on the structure of the study, the information you're going to grab from it is going to look a little bit different. So I made up this super sophisticated PowerPoint about how we can, that was a joke, about how we can determine which design you need to code for depending on the study that you're reading. So the first thing we need to look at is what is the unit of measure, meaning what data are they analyzing, specifically looking at if they randomized, did they randomize by student, or did they randomize by teacher or classroom? So kind of looking at, do we need to take into account the impact that teachers would have within their classroom setting? Because if all the kids are in the same classroom, that's going to be different than if students are spread out across different teachers, if they have a little bit more independence. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is look in your study for whether or not it's a student that's sort of being randomized or that's being analyzed, or if the data is being analyzed at the teacher level, or if the teacher is the one that is randomized into groups. So we're going to start at the top, and we're going to assume we have a study that is dealing just with students, that there's no teacher involved. They're just looking at students, maybe in tutoring groups, or they're pulled after school for things. We don't care about who their teacher is. That's going to be the majority of the studies that we find, especially in the group designs. So the next thing that you need to look for is whether or not there's a control group. Sometimes this will be called the control, sometimes it'll be called the comparison, sometimes it'll be called the business as usual, but we first need to see whether or not they have a control group. And a lot of times, researchers are very proud of the fact that they have a control group, because this means that they have greater validity in their studies, that it's an overall usually a better design, so they oftentimes will sort of drop it in the abstract if they have a control group. So you can see here I pulled up a study by Lynn Fuchs, and it says in the abstract, it's looking at first grade tutoring in mathematics. We have a ton of first graders. We have that they were assigned, they were randomly assigned to tutoring or control conditions. So that tells me right away that we have a control group. So I'm going to continue with this sort of line to figure out if this study is considered a group 1 study or if this is going to fall into our group 2 studies. So I'm going to look now to see whether or not they had a pre-test or a post-test. So let's see. Sometimes it'll say in the abstract itself, it'll say pre-test, post-test design. I'm not seeing it here in the abstract, so the best place for me to go look is going to be in the results section, because when they list the different measures, they usually list the pre-test, post-test scores. So this is going to be my demographics table, so I'm going to keep going, and I'm looking for my results table. And I'm going to keep scrolling. Okay, so right here, here's my results. I can see here this is my control group. This is my at-risk tutored group, which is the treatment. We don't really need to worry about any of the numbers right now. All I need to see is that there was a pre-test and a post-test. So this study would fall in my group 1. So we minimize this. That would be right here where it says group 1 effect size randomized by student, and then if you click on it, it'll open up and will say, well, you'll get the spinning wheel of death, but then eventually it will open up and will say, it'll include across the top pre-test, post-test. I'm a little scared now that the spinning wheel is going so long, so I'm just going to continue talking. We're just going to ignore that spinning wheel. Oh, here we go. So it says group effect sizes randomized by student, And then if you click on that, it said it included the pretest, post-test. And we'll come back on how to fill out all this stuff. We're just trying to figure out which effect size code sheet we need to do first. So if you have a study that randomizes by student, includes the control group, I know there are studies out there that do not have a pretest. They're pretty unusual because for the most part, if researchers go to the trouble and sort of the logistical pain of randomizing students, they're going to give them a pretest and a post-test because that's just best practice. But if you find a study that has a control group and no pretest, post-test, that would fall under group 2. So what that would look like is it would have a study where they would just test the kids once. Just one post-test at the end, and then they would compare the post-test of the control kids to the post-test of the treatment kids. Like I said, I know there's studies out there. I went through and I looked for them, and they're really hard to find. But if you are ever unsure, you can always go back to the results table, look for pre-post. That's usually a very clear indicator, or it will be usually in the abstract, or it'll be in the methods section. And if you're unsure, you can always reach out. So the next type of study we're going to look at is assuming we have, we're randomizing by student, and we don't have a control group. So what that means is this will just be a pre-test, post-test, no control. So I pulled up this article here to sort of give you a sense of what this might look like. So in the abstract, right away, you can see it doesn't say anything about a control group. And just because it doesn't say doesn't mean they don't have one. But that's usually kind of a red flag. And it says here the students perform better on the post-test in terms of the number of problems than on the pre-test. So a lot of times, if they're bragging about post-test, pre-test difference, that means they didn't have a control group. So I'm going to scroll, and what you see here for this study is when I get to the results section, they don't even have a table because they can present the information just here in a paragraph. So if you see things like paired sample t-test, that's usually an indicator that there was no control group, because what that means is if it's a paired sample, then it's testing against the same students, so pre-test, post-test of the same students. You can see here they're talking about just the pre-test and then comparing that to the post-test. They don't mention a control group anywhere. So that tells me this is going to be a no control group. Sometimes we refer to this as a repeated measures group because you're just taking the same measure and testing it repeated times. So pre-test, post-test. So that would be under group 3. I'm not going to pull up the folders because I'm scared I'll get the spinning wheel of death again. So you would just click on the code sheet that says group 3 and it'll say student, no control. So let's assume, however, maybe you find a study where they randomize by the teacher. And I think we've looked at this one before, if not this one exactly. A lot of the places where you're going to find the teacher effects are going to be with Asha Jitendra. She does work in this area. So what you would look for this is you're looking for, in the abstract, they'll usually mention that they worked with teachers. So you can see here in this abstract, it's talking about 148 7th grade students and their teachers participating in a 10-day intervention. That to me is usually a red flag that teachers were involved and that it's probably randomized by classroom. The other thing I'm going to look here is that there is a control condition. We're assuming at this point that all teacher studies include a control group. If you find a study that is considered a repeated measures, so just pre-test, post-test, no control group, and it randomizes by the teachers, go ahead and reach out to me. I don't think we're going to have any of those because that would be kind of a peculiar design. But if you find one, please reach out if you feel like you have that that weird unicorn study. I don't know if I want to call it a unicorn. Just be an odd study. So how I know that it is going to be randomized by the teacher is it is going to tell me in the method section that the students are randomized, or excuse me, not the students are randomized, that the randomization occurs at the classroom level. So once I know randomization occurs at the classroom level, the teacher is sort of the clustered unit of analysis. That's what we call it when it's clustered within a classroom, because we have to take that into account, because depending on who the teacher is, that's actually going to impact how effective the intervention is. So it's wonkadoo statistics. We'll get into it when we start talking about the individual code sheets. But what I need to determine is whether or not there's a pretest included. So same thing like before with the students. I'm going to go to the results section, and I'm going to see here there's pretest, post-test data. So this is going to be my group 4, and I would go ahead and click on that code sheet for group 4 data. Again, this is kind of like the student pretest data. It doesn't make a ton of sense for studies to spend so much money that they have this huge sample size and then they forget to do a pretest. So you're not going to find a whole lot of clustered, randomized by teacher, control group studies that don't have a pretest. But if you find one, it would go under group 5. So I hope this was helpful in helping you determine how you are going to start coding these sheets. We're going to get into how to code each one of these different groups, but obviously the first step is figuring out which group your article fits under. So at any point, if you ever have any questions, or you are second guessing yourself, or you just want a second opinion, you can always reach out and I'll be able to help you. I'll be able to clarify which group your article fits under.